Hi, I'm Ryan Bouchard,
And I'm Emily Schmidt.
and we run the Mushroom Hunting Foundation. It's a nonprofit dedicated to teaching more people how to safely enjoy America's many amazing wild mushroom species. And mushroom hunting is a ton of fun. We're here to talk to you about it through the Hera Gallery and the Green Stitch Initiative. The Hera Gallery and Educational Foundation is a nonprofit, artist-run gallery that promotes contemporary professional artists through a comprehensive exhibition schedule of member work and both curated and juried social justice shows.
The Green Stitch Knitting Community Together is a creative outreach project from Hera Gallery that uses simple crafts such as sewing and knitting as a vehicle to engage our local community. Hera has partnered with organizations like Rhode Island Natural History Survey and Save the Bay to develop monthly programming that brings environmental awareness to topics that are specific to Southern Rhode Island.
And from an art perspective, mushrooms are a great topic. Now, there's a lot of science involved with mushroom hunting, especially when you're trying to identify exactly what the mushroom is so you can figure out if you can eat it or not. But from an artist's perspective, it's an amazing world out there. The different shapes and sizes and textures and patterns and colors of mushrooms, really pretty mind-blowing, and it's just a ton of diversity. And as Americans, we've sort of been raised to ignore mushrooms because they might be poisonous and they're kind of scary. We tend to not have a very good understanding of what mushrooms even are in this country. So that's part of what Emily and I are doing, is trying to educate people about that and just to appreciate them. You may find that if you just start paying more attention to mushrooms, you may be astounded at how many amazing things are out there, maybe even in your own backyard.
So we're going to talk a little bit today about what we consider the fundamental rules of mushroom hunting. Before you really get into the hobby, there's some cautionary things you need to know, as it is, there's some danger involved in this pursuit. The most important thing to remember when identifying mushrooms is, when in doubt,
Throw it out.
That's right. If even a small part of the mushroom doesn't match the description in your field guide, don't include it in your collection. And you always want to refer to a book while eating wild mushrooms.
Right. Maybe even my book, Gourmet Mushrooms of the Northeast. This is a book that I put out a couple of years ago. It's sort of combined with a calendar. I'll give you a better description of it at the end of this talk. But that's a great resource. There are other great mushroom books too. And comparing a picture to a mushroom you've found is a great way to begin identifying it. Flipping through the book and seeing what looks like it. But then you have to look closer and read the relevant information and make sure all the details actually check out. Some different mushroom species are very, very similar except for one certain detail. So it's going to take some study. There are some mushrooms that we consider safe for beginners. These are the mushrooms that are well known to be easy to recognize, easy to identify. So those are the ones we would recommend studying first, the ones that are known to be the easiest ones. And we'll talk a little bit more about that.
You'd be happy to know that with concern to collecting wild mushrooms, even the deadly poisonous mushrooms can be handled just fine by children or adults, so long as they don't get pieces of the mushroom in their body to ingest. The toxins won't be absorbed in your skin, but mushrooms still do pose a threat to many pets, particularly dogs, so make sure that you keep your pets away from your mushrooms that you're collecting. Some people like to collect mushrooms in a basket. It's a very traditional and happy way to collect mushrooms, but we encourage you to keep different kinds of mushrooms in separate bags to avoid confusing them. You'll want to use paper bags or wax bags, but never plastic bags or Tupperware containers, which can encourage spoilage with your mushrooms. You want to refrigerate your wild mushrooms as soon as possible, and most varieties will stay fresh in the fridge for about a week, though some species will last a lot less time.
Now, at some point, if they are edible, you're probably going to want to cook them and eat them. It's important to know that almost every wild mushroom species has to be cooked. Even some of the most famous edible wild mushrooms, like morels and chanterelles, they'll make you throw up if you eat them raw. So you better cook them. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Just to go over the basic rules of cooking wild mushrooms. This is, of course, after you know what kind of mushroom you have. Mushrooms should be sliced and cooked 7 minutes on medium, and the slices should be 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch thick. And that's sort of standardized so that the 7 minutes will cook through. If you cut them too thick, then frying them for 7 minutes might not quite do it. And you don't want them to be undercooked. So you slice them up and cook them 7 minutes on medium. Now with certain kinds, 7 minutes will make it safe to eat, but you might want to cook certain kinds of mushrooms longer to improve the texture. You get a nice golden brown sear on both sides and sprinkle it with some salt. And sometimes that's the best way to enjoy some of these mushrooms. The flavors are really astonishing, and you might not want to mix it in a soup or put it on a pizza. You might just want to have it plain. If you find a whole lot of mushrooms at some point, then you're going to want to start making recipes with them. But when you find just one or two, very often the best thing to do is slice them up, saute them, a little butter or oil, and cook them for that 7 minutes on medium, and then just salt them and eat them with a fork. That's probably the best way to enjoy most mushrooms.
With regard to eating them, our favorite thing to do with wild mushrooms, it's important to remember that any person can be prone to an allergy of any species, even some mushrooms from the supermarket.
Now, if somebody's allergic to portobello mushrooms, they already know that because they've tried it before. But what if it's some obscure species of mushroom that you haven't tried yet? Now, this isn't just about mushrooms. This could go for any ingredient, a different kind of tropical fruit you've never tried before. So this isn't because mushrooms are so scary. It's just because we're talking about here edible mushrooms that you haven't tried yet. What if you're allergic to it? So how do you deal with that possibility?
Well, you just start small. You take a couple forkfuls of a species that you're trying for the first time, and just wait a day or two to see how it agrees with you as you're digesting it. You don't want to overload your system on a mushroom you're not sure if you're sensitive to or not. So just start slowly and try to, as you go forward, try only one new species per day, so you don't, in the case that you eat a few different species and have a bad reaction, you'll know which one caused it. On rare occasions, an allergic reaction has been more serious for someone who is very young or very old or in frail condition, so that's important to remember too. As a precaution, do try only one new species a day, only a couple forkfuls at a time. Remember, testing them with cautious sampling is not to check and see if they're poisonous. You would only eat a mushroom 100% identified. What you're doing is checking to see if you're sensitive to that particular species.
And again, we don't mean to make it sound any scarier than it is. We're talking about an edible mushroom that you haven't tried before. What if you're allergic to it? Well, the first day you try it, you have that couple of forkfuls. The second day, you can, make a soup or a pizza with it if you have enough. The point is that when it's something that's brand new to you, just go easy that first time.
So we have a few questions that people have submitted we want to get to before we end. Someone asked, what are some local New England mushrooms that people can look for in their own backyard? And could you name some specific to fall or early winter?
Well, first of all, let's just mention some of the best ones throughout the year, and then we'll narrow it down to the late fall.
Black trumpets.
Of course, you mentioned black trumpets
lion's
first.
mane.
Black trumpets are definitely one of the best, if not the best. What else did you say?
Hen of the woods and lion's mane. Some people are surprised to know that some of the most prized mushrooms in Asia can also be found, or Italy or France, can also be found here in the United States.
That's true. Something like the maitake from Japan, which the Italians call signorine. Well, a lot of Americans call it hen of the woods. The reality is that species grows anywhere there are oak trees, you can find it. So it's something that's known around the world. So that's a great one. Yeah, hen of the woods, chicken of the woods, the beefsteak polypore, the pheasant polypore, the black staining polypore. Now, what's this word polypore I keep saying? Well, think of the mushrooms in the supermarket, portobellos, shiitakes. If you look underneath one of those mushrooms, what do you see? A whole bunch of little thin fins in a circle, like a wagon wheel. Those little slats are called gills, just like the gills on a fish. And although they're not for breathing, what they're for is releasing the spores of the mushroom, which is, you can think of spores as little microscopic seeds of mushrooms. It's basically how they function. And the spores are released from those gills. Now, it surprises a lot of people to learn that even though the mushrooms in the supermarket have gills, in the wild, the mushrooms with gills are basically for experts only. They're very difficult to identify correctly, and there are some quite poisonous ones, and if you make a mistake, it could be bad. So, the local mushrooms with gills, some of them even look a lot like portobellos, and some of them are edible and delicious. But as a beginner, you want to not go down that road. You want to focus more on mushrooms from other categories. The best category of mushrooms for beginners to focus on is the polypores. So the polypores are a family of mushrooms, many different species in that group. And they're not all edible, but certain ones in that group are edible and also easy to recognize. They're big, colorful, they have features that make them pretty obvious, and they're the easiest ones to learn first. So what do these polypores look like? Well, they tend to grow sideways from a tree, like a shelf. So here's a polypore. This is Ganoderma applanatum. So if I was a tree, the thing would just grow out sideways like that. That's how they grow. And a lot of them don't really have too much of a stalk. They're just attached directly to the tree that they're growing from. So they're shaped like a sideways growing shelf, and underneath the cap, instead of gills, you've got pores. The pores are tiny little holes, often too small to even see, but basically you've got a smooth surface underneath. And so this is a different family of mushrooms. There are many different kinds of polypores, and like I said, they're not all safe to eat, but some of them are. The one on the cover of my book, that's the chicken of the woods. If you look underneath these mushrooms, there's no gills, just a smooth layer of pores. And that's one of the things you use to identify it. Now, a famous mushroom from the month of May in our area is the hemlock reishi. Now, hemlock is a poisonous plant, but the hemlock tree is not poisonous, and neither is the hemlock reishi mushroom that grows on the wood of this tree. Here's a very large one. That's a hemlock reishi that's, geez, I don't know, 18 inches wide, and it's dried up. Now, it's not all mushrooms dry out like that. The ones that do are considered conks, C-O-N-K. Let's move on for now. I just wanted to mention the polypores is a great group of mushrooms for beginners to focus on. And from there, let's see. The question was, what are the good mushrooms to be thinking about this time of year? We're getting into December now, and the mushroom season is sort of coming to an end, but you can still find some things. Oyster mushrooms are out there, fall oyster mushrooms, Pleurotus ostriatus, and also the shaggy manes, probably the easiest mushroom of late fall, Coprinus comatus, the shaggy mane, or lawyer's wig as it's called in the UK. It's a really neat looking mushroom. That's one to look up, the shaggy mane. Now of course, we're talking about edible mushrooms, but if you're ever unsure of what you've found, get in touch with us and we can double check for you to make sure you don't eat anything dangerous. We'll give you our contact information at the end of the talk. But for now, let's. I don't want to forget to mention the chaga. Do you want to talk about chaga a little bit?
But, sure. Chaga is a really interesting mushroom that's gaining notoriety for its medicinal, immune-boosting properties. It looks much like a gnarled piece of bark that's been burnt, but it has some key features that make it distinctive. One of the things I like about chaga the most is that it's really the only mushroom that you can collect in the dead of wintertime. And it's traditionally collected in winter because you see it grows on white birch trees, a tree with white bark. So when the leaves fall in the wintertime and the stark white trees are adorned with this black mass, it makes them easier to spot. So chaga hunting is a fun activity for the winter months, especially if you can head up further north where there are more mountainous areas and more kinds of birches.
You can find chaga in Rhode Island as well. I think in Rhode Island, when we find chaga, it's usually on yellow birch. The chaga is definitely sort of strange. Mushrooms generally, they all grow from something called a mycelium. The mycelium is underground or inside rotting wood, and you basically don't ever see it. But it's a fine, white, fuzzy material, a little bit like spider webs. And this mycelium out of sight, that's the actual organism that produces the mushrooms. The mushrooms are just its fruit. So that surprises a lot of people, and that's also why collecting mushrooms is sustainable. It's very similar to picking the berries off of a bush. The bush is still there and it's going to produce more berries next year. And that's why it's really cool when you find a place where mushrooms grow. You now know a mushroom spot where the mushrooms are likely to keep reappearing for decades. So about the chaga is a strange one. The chaga is one case where the little mushroom that grows from it is flat and appears under the peeling birch bark. So it's very rarely seen and it's basically ignored. With chaga, what you're collecting is a big chunk of hardened mycelium. So while the mycelium is inhabiting this tree, these sort of reservoirs of mycelium are sort of end up erupting out of the side of the tree, and you break it off, and here's the chaga. Now, not every big growth on a tree is a chaga, and surely some of them are bad for you to use. So how do you tell if it's really a chaga? Well, it is black on the outside, and it's got a strange pattern of sort of geometric cubes and squares. That's the outside, so you want to look for that look on the outside. But on the inside, you want to see this sort of golden brown or ochre colored pattern of speckles. Now that's a chaga. That's what you want to see on the inside. If it looks like just like, you know, messed up wood or something, then it's not a chaga. It's some other type of burl or some other kind of tree disease. So you also want to be collecting these from birch trees. And there's a sort of a look-alike for the chaga. Like there are with most mushrooms, there are other kinds of mushrooms that sort of look similar. And that's one of the reasons to get my book, is it talks about the...
It details the chaga and its poisonous look-alike, the black cherry knot.
So you'll be able to tell the black cherry knot and the chaga apart very easily, but you do want to compare some pictures of them first. So let's see, what's the next question?
The next question we have is, can you store or preserve your foraged mushrooms, or should you eat them right away? Are there other uses besides eating them?
Two good questions.
There's some great questions there. Of course, you want to learn how to preserve your bounty, because mushrooming is a transient thing. You can't always get them when they're not in season.
And you can't always eat them all before they start to go bad in your refrigerator. So what do you do when you find a really good score of mushrooms, too many to eat in just a few days?
Eating them right away is a great way to enjoy them. They do degrade in quality over time in your refrigerator. But if you can't get them for a few days or even up to a week, they should last pretty well. But you'll want to invest in a dehydrator. This dehydrates mushrooms to be reconstituted or rehydrated and used in cooking. But once dried, the mushrooms will last indefinitely.
Now she said invest, but it's $30 or $40. You can get a nice dehydrator. It's a very simple machine, and it turns your mushrooms into dried mushrooms. And you can keep those stored for ages, really. What about freezing them? Another
great way to preserve your mushroom bounty is by cooking and then freezing your mushrooms. Never freeze raw mushrooms. This has been responsible for a few cases of food poisoning. You want to cook and then freeze them, and they can last for years in your freezer without degrading in quality. And in terms of other uses for mushrooms besides eating them, there are a myriad of applications for mushrooms that are being explored. In the arts community, they're used to dye wool or even make fibers. They can be made into a leather-like substitute that is made out of the tinder conch and known as amadou felt. There's a lot of myco-technologies that are emerging in researching mushrooms, using the mycelium as alternative packaging, as alternative home building supplies for homes, and things of that like. Microremediation is a hot topic right now, using the mushroom's mycelium to degrade and neutralize pollutants in our environment, which is a fascinating study. The next question is, what are some benefits to being able to identify mushrooms in your backyard?
Right, there are a lot of benefits to that. We think probably the best benefit of it is being able to enjoy eating them sometimes. But there are a lot of other great things that come along with learning mushroom hunting. It encourages honing your photography skills, and your cooking skills. It encourages physical activity because, what's on the other side of that hill? Are there more of these mushrooms? Let's go a little further and see what we can find. So it encourages a lot of personal growth, and perhaps most important, it forces you to make the kind of decision that you don't normally have to make in the modern world. Namely, can I eat this or is it poisonous? It forces you to combine a little bit of scientific knowledge of the science of fungi, mycology, M-Y-C-O, that means the study of fungi. Mycology and learning a little bit of basic mycology is essential to being a mushroom hunter, but you also have to combine that knowledge with common sense in order to actually put it to practical use. And frankly, that kind of thinking is just nowhere to be found in the modern world, and it's I think it's good for the mind, and it's definitely good for the soul. I mean, we've talked a lot about the sort of spiritual tranquility and happiness that can come from this sort of treasure hunt. It's very calming. It's also very exciting. There's a lot of different things to say about it. It's really a whole world of fun. The last question we have here is, what are some of your services or other engaging opportunities for people to learn more about wild mushrooms, especially during the COVID pandemic? Well, we're not doing classes now, unfortunately, but we certainly hope to be doing them next year, so stay in touch. We do a lot of different types of classes, public and private. I want to, just as an example, talk about the private class we do called the Mushroom Festival. That's where we come to your house and do a mushroom slideshow in your living room using our own all-local photography. So it's an amazing slideshow, and then we take you out mushroom hunting somewhere outdoors, somewhere conveniently located depending on where you live, and then we come back to your place to do a delicious cooking demonstration. So that's called the Mushroom Festival. It's a private class though. You get a small group of family and friends together, and that's a great way to learn about mushrooms. And we can help you identify mushrooms for free if you want to text pictures of mushrooms to us at 401-595-6143. That's 401-595-6143, and that's us, the Mushroom Hunting Foundation. And that's free. We can double check your pictures and help you see what it is you're dealing with before you consider cooking it. And however, what we want to recommend, and this would be a great way to support us, is to make a purchase of my book, Gourmet Mushrooms of the Northeast, 2019. Now, I must admit, it does contain a 2019 calendar, which is expired, but just ignore that, because it really is a book. For one thing, the calendar portion shows you a lot of different species of mushrooms, depending on what month it is, and it's organized that way. So, for example, in May, you've got the pheasant polypore, and right up in the corner here, it tells you that it's safe for beginners. So certain ones are marked safe for beginners, and those are the ones we encourage you to start with. But there are so many other different species in here. Black trumpets, hen of the woods, chicken of the woods, lion's mane. Let's show the lion's mane, because that's one of the coolest ones. This is the lion's mane, safe for beginners. And there's some images of it. These are all from Rhode Island. It's an amazing mushroom, and it tastes incredible. So that's one of the ones you've just got to try. And there's a page about chaga. Now here's the interesting part. When the calendar comes to an end, you turn the last page, and it suddenly turns into a book. So the second half of it is all these pages that turn sideways, and there's a ton of information and a ton of recipes and a lot about the culture of mushroom hunting, and yeah, it really is, not to walk you through the whole thing, but it really is a book. It's not just a calendar. So that's why I'm suggesting that you buy it. I'm not trying to sell you a expired calendar for no reason. It really is a book, and we designed it to be the best introduction to safely enjoying this hobby. So if you want to order one from our website, www.mushroomhunting.org, go in the shop and get one of these, and the pictures are all local, southern New England mostly, and the majority are from Rhode Island. And
Also on our website, you can sign up for our newsletter where we send periodic updates about what we're doing and new projects that we're working on. And we also do sell gift certificates for classes in the near future.
So yeah, please do send us your email address and join our newsletter list. Take a look at our website. Consider taking a class with us next year. Consider getting a copy of this either as a gift or for yourself. And if you get it for someone, please make sure they're aware that they shouldn't be writing their appointments in it because the calendar part's gone, but the book part remains, and it's a very valuable resource. And it also recommends a lot of other books about mushroom hunting. I hope you've enjoyed this talk, and thanks to Hera Gallery and the Green Stitch Initiative for collaborating with us to bring you this presentation.